Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Oxygen for the Soul. This week's parsha is Parsha Tessaveh. And, we're in the middle of having this fascinating talk in preparation for Shabbat, but also in preparation for the month that we're in. We're in the month of Adar. And the month of Adar is, this year is a little different because this year is called Shana Me'uberet. It's what we call a pregnant year or a leap year. And therefore, there are 2 months of Adar. This Monday night is what we call Purim Katan, the small Purim, and it's not the actual Purim. We add an extra month every so often because we're trying to keep up the lunar calendar to be aligned with the solar calendar. So in a year where we are adding an extra month, we have a situation where the month itself, the month of Adar, where we actually celebrate the holiday of Purim, is pushed off to the second month of Adar, and not the first month of Adar. And the question is why? So the Gemara tells us that the reason why Adar, Purim, is celebrated in Purim, aside from the fact that's when the holiday is, but it's not an accident that it happens right after Passover, to be able to connect it to Geula, to redemption. And therefore, if the rabbis had a choice between pushing the month of the Purim holiday to the first month or the second month, it went to the second month so it could have its proximity to the month of Pesach. And therefore, this Monday night is a special night of Kedusha, a special night of holiness, because of its connection to Purim as well. There's a special duality this year because of this extra month, an extra month of Mishanichnas Adar Marbe B'Simcha, an extra month of bringing joy into our lives. And therefore, if you can, Monday night, have a small meal, do something to connect it to this powerful day of potential, of growth and happiness, thinking a little bit about what you can do to express your potential, which is actually what happiness truly is, expressing that potential, living that potential. All right, let's jump into the Parsha. Parsha Tessaveh. Parsha Tessaveh tells us a lot about a continuation of the previous Parsha, Tzirumah. We're talking about the different things necessary to build for the actual tabernacle, for the Mishkan. You have a discussion over here about the clothing that Aaron was, or that Moshe was told to make for Aaron, and for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest. What's interesting, though, is that the Parsha begins, Va'ata Tessaveh, and now you shall command Et Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, V'chu elecha shemen zayit zach, take for yourself pure olive oil, katit l'ma'or, something that is pure, pressed for illumination, l'ma'or, for lighting, la'alot ner tamid, in order to make sure this kindle, to make sure this lamp is continuously lit. Couple of things here. The first thing that we notice right away is the fact that there is zero mention of Moses, no mention of Moshe. Up until now, every parsha we read up until now, the second Moshe was mentioned. Moshe was in the parsha, and this is the first time that Moses is not mentioned. And our midrashim tell us that he is actually missing from the whole entire parsha. And the reason why he was missing is because when Moshe was arguing, debating God about this, destroying the people for the sin of the golden calf, he said that if you destroy these people, Machenina, erase me from Sifcha, erase me from your book. I don't want to be in your book. If you're going to destroy these people, take me out. Now, he didn't want to be taken out, but it was a way of kind of pushing God back. And the rabbis teach us a very deep lesson over here. Everything that we say carries some weight. And for a righteous person to say something, even if that's not what he wanted, it was just a bargaining technique, although I'm sure he meant it, it still has to manifest itself in some way in this world. And therefore, there's one parsha in this week's parsha where he is not mentioned as a result of him threatening to be taken out of the book itself. Now, what the Gra and other Chachamim point out is that we know from the end of the parsha that every parsha, there's an accounting of how many verses are in the Torah reading. And this week we have 101 psukim, 101 verses written in our Torah reading, Parshat Tessaveh. Now what's interesting is this. We know also that every single Hebrew letter has a numerical value. So often if you're Sephardic, we'll go to synagogue when they're on Saturday, when they're offering off aliyot, we'll say Michael. And Michael is the name of an angel. And Michael is also Gematria, his letter, the letters of his name equal 101, the number of psukim in this week's parsha. But there's actually something fascinating about Moshe's name. You see, there's 2 kinds of letters when we read a name. There's the letters that make up the name, Mem, Shin, He, right? Those 3 letters make up his name, but there's also letters that are in there that are hidden. For example, if you were to write out the letter mem, how would you write it? You write it mem mem. If you were to write out the letter shin, how would you write it? Shin yud nun. If you were to write the letter he, how would you write it? He aleph. So in Moshe's name, you have a bunch of letters that are hidden. Those hidden letters, mem, yud, nun, aleph, okay, those are the letters that are not written out when you're writing Moshe's name, equal 101. So here you have an example where Moshe is hidden in the parsha, not seen. A part of him that is being expressed is the inner part of him. Tessaveh, now go command the Jewish people and take this olive oil. What it's got to be? It's got to be la'alot ner tamid. It's got to be lit continuously. Okay? We as Jews love this idea of being constant, of being deliberate, of being focused. Moshe is not mentioned, but everything about Moshe is super deliberate. Let me explain to you what I mean. We have to ask another question. As we go through the parsha, God says to Moshe to make these different garments for Moshe. Vata akrav elecha et Aharon achicha. You should go ahead and bring near to yourself Aaron, your brother. Again, his name, it doesn't say Moshe. Vata, and you. Now you, go bring to us Aaron, your brother, and his children, mitoch bnei Israel, from within the Jewish people, likano li. To what? Likano li? To make him a kohen, to make him a priest, a minister for me. Okay? Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, Tamar, Bnei Aaron. These are the children of Nadav. I see that they now make them very, very special clothing. And the question is, a couple of questions. Number one is, why make Aaron the priest and not Moses? Moses is your guy. He's done everything from you. Moses and Aaron have the same father. They come from the same priestly family. Why separate Aaron for this job and not give Moses this position? Not give Moshe this position? It's a fascinating question. In addition to that, why make him all this clothing? Why does a priest need these clothing? Does he really need to have special clothing? Special robes and tunics and belts and these bells and the choshen, a breastplate. You know, why does he need all this stuff over here? Is it important? He's got a special, his hat, right? He's got a head plate. You have all these things that are there. The question is, why does he need it? So let's do it like this. Parshat tells us that there's something called kehuna, something called the priesthood. And we know from the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot that there are 3 crowns that were given to the world. There's something called Keter Malchut, Keter Kehuna, and Keter Torah. Keter means crown. A crown of Torah, a crown of kingship, and a crown of priestliness. We know the crown of priestliness, the Mishnah tells us, goes to Aaron and his children. The crown of kingship goes to King David and his children. Keter Torah, who does that go to? The crown of Torah goes to whom? Not Moses, goes to the Jewish people. So Moses has no crown. It's interesting. Actually, when you think about Moses, there's really not much of Moses. There's a very deep relationship, I believe, in the Parsha between sharing information about a person who has no name, who has no special clothing, who doesn't even have a crown. Moshe has nothing. As a matter of fact, we call it Torat Moshe, the Moses' Torah, but really it's God's Torah. What does Moshe write? He didn't write anything. God wrote the book. Moses just wrote it down for him, right? He was a copy guy. Moses does none of the miracles on his own. He has no power. What's so unique about him? And I think if we understand this a little bit deeper, maybe we'll understand the idea of the clothing of Aaron. You see, there's 2 things that give us our identity. There's our external identity, the way we think about who we are in our mind, and then there's how we project ourselves, our identity, the clothing that make man, right? So the reason where that quote's written for a reason. Now, on some level, we believe that the body is the clothing of the soul, and therefore your body gives you your inner identity, your external identity, and then you have the clothing that you put on top of it that also becomes your identity. And we know that your external features impact internal features. So, for example, if you go to work and you're having a casual Friday, you're going to behave a little differently than when you're wearing a nice 3-piece suit and nice shoes. There's something about what we put on ourselves, what we adorn, that impacts us internally. Adam is punished with this earthly body stuff. His body was translucent. He radiated internally. His inner identity shone forth. And all you and I see right now is a light reflecting off my face in the screen over here. You're not really seeing who I am at my core. You're seeing only a small aspect of what I am. And therefore, when we're thinking about our identities, we all too often get confused that we think that our identity is just this external things, but really the biggest part of who you are is what's happening on the inside. Things that can't be measured, that can't be seen. So an officer, a fireman, a doctor, they have a certain kind of clothing to help remind them who they are at that moment. That doesn't define who they are, but the Kohen Gadol is different. The Kohen Gadol is meant to be this priest. He's supposed to ascend and be separate from everybody else. His job is to be in a place of kedusha, of holiness. He's unique. As a matter of fact, the pasuk says very clearly. God says to Moshe, "Vata hekrev elecha et Aaron achicha." I want you to bring close or set aside your brother, mitoch bnei Yisrael, from amongst the Jewish people. What is Moses' job? Moses' job is to be the lawgiver, the Torah giver. He can't be separate from everybody else. He has to be inclusive, included with everybody else. That's why he doesn't have a crown. His job is to marry God to the Jewish people and vice versa. His job is to make this deep connection. Aharon's job is to be nivdal, to be separate. Moshe's job is to be a joiner. So how could you have the guy who gives the Torah also be the Kohen? And the answer is it's impossible. He can't do both jobs. So God has to say, Moses, even though technically speaking, you may be the right guy for this job, but ultimately it can't be you because your whole function and purpose is to join and not to be separate. The Kohen's job is to create separation. Well, there's something called the mundane and the holy. He represents that. He wears the clothing to allow him to remember that he's uniquely different. And all the processes in the temple and the Mishkan that were there for the Kohen to maintain that distinction were all there for that reason. Because he is kadosh. He is separate. But Moses' job is that he can't be separate. Moses' job is that there is no special clothing for him. He's just like you and me. And it's so profoundly beautiful, my friends, because we say, the Rambam says that anyone can be as great, anyone can reach the level of Moshe. And we know that Moshe and Aaron are equals. And the question is, how is that even possible if we know that there'll never be a Navi, there'll never be a prophet as great as Moses? And the answer is like this. Every single person can reach their full potential. What makes Moshe and Aaron so alike is the fact that each of them reach their own unique potential. Not Aaron reaching Moses' potential, but Aaron reaching Aaron's potential. You reaching your potential is how you can become like Moses. Don't allow life to be a distraction of the external, the chitzoniyut, the external things. Allow life to be something that allows you to kind of see the inner parts of who you are. The truest nature of your simcha, of your happiness, comes from understanding what you are on the inside, not measuring it by the external things. Nice homes, cars, have them. Do good things with them. Make a lot of money, but not at the expense of losing yourself in the process. Because the most precious things in the world can't be bought with money. A spouse, child, love. These things money can't buy. That's where real value comes from. The external things are nice, but at the end of the day, this week's parasha reminds us that you have the greatest man that ever walked the planet. His name was Moses, and his greatness was that he was able to let go of his outer identity so that he could create space for an infinite being to allow him to be directed to create and tell the greatest story ever, allow for the greatest events ever to happen in humanity. It came from a man who annulled the self. Not that he had no identity. He has tremendous identity. Moses is powerful. He's profound. But his identity came from the fact that he was able to create a space for allow God to reign in, which means that he got angry, but he withheld his anger. He sometimes felt, certain passions, and he was able to restrain them because he had a higher purpose and calling. That is what we really are. We live in a generation which wants us to believe that your urge and your wants and your needs, that's who you truly are. And that's not true. Those urges, wants, and needs, while I believe at some point in a healthy way they need to be satiated, but they don't define who you are. I pass by this awesome pizza shop and I salivate at it, but I can't go there. It's not kosher. That's not who I am. My emotions, my automatic processes don't define me. Moses' greatness is that he recognized the most clarity that his identity is an expression or it comes from the desire of wanting to be godly. God gives us the commandments. Moses is the law giver, not an accident that he's a man that does not have special clothing. He's a man in this week's parasha who does not have a name, in a parasha that talks about clothing and identity. He's seen in the background. He sacrificed so much so that he can become something so profound. This is why, by the way, we say there's no greater accolade in the Torah than being called an eved, a servant. That's what you want me to strive for? Yeah, you see, everyone's going to be a servant to something in this world, my friends. You're either going to be a servant to your passions, your wants, your needs, or you could transcend that, have everything, but become a servant of the divine, of an infinite being who wants you to have blessing and happiness and live in a reality where maybe what you think is your identity is really not. But instead, you sacrifice that external identity so you could express this truest inner part of who you are, and bringing God into the world, living a life of happiness, living in a world where you're bringing all this positive power and energy. That is what I believe the parasha is about. How do we do that? By constantly, ner tamid, the constant work, the constant focus, daily, what am I? You, my friends, as Yoda said, are a luminous being, not this crude matter. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom Avarach. Thank you so much for listening. Looking forward to having this conversation again next week. Shabbat Shalom, Kol Tuv.